Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are doing another deity build. Gruumsh, or Gruumsh, however his name is pronounced, who is the patron god of the Orc race and is the greater god of the Orcish pantheon. Basically, he is unique for having a single eye, and Orcs believe that that single eye is always watching over them, judging the worth of each and every one of their kind. Basically, Gruumsh actually created the Orcs and basically guided their destiny with the aid of his divine subordinates, ruling over Orcish mortals and gods alike as their unquestioned patriarch. If you couldn't tell, I read that directly off the Forgotten Realms wiki, but as you can see, Gruumsh is really interesting. He is straight up the creator of the Orcs and has a very close relationship with his, well, chosen, shall we say, of which we have one right here, as per the deity build series. So, Gruumsh is known for a few things. Number one, fighting with a spear. His own spear is highly unique, but he's also known to gift magical iron spears to his chosen few shamans, which are basically the holy leaders of the kind of basically Gruumsh religion among orcs, and as such are probably his most powerful chosen, which is what we've decided to build today. Now, Gruumsh's domains are War and Tempest, and while it would make sense to go for War domain with a build like this, I've decided to go for something a little different. Me and the community over on my livestream, which is where these deity builds are made, kind of thought it would be more interesting to go down the Tempest route, and I think I've created a really interesting combination here, which will make you question some decisions I've made, but once you see this build in action, you'll realise what I'm going for, and I'll readily admit, before testing this build, I didn't think it was going to be that strong. But I was wrong. This build has probably one of the more unique playstyles I've come across, in which while raw power is definitely a part of it, it's got an amazing amount of control and utility that I wasn't expecting. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. We're going to be kicking things off as a Barbarian. Barbarian is going to give us access to all simple and martial weapons, light and medium armor, as well as shields, which we all want, and a few skills which will be nice to have. We're going to be getting Rage here, which allows us to go into Barbarian's Rage. I mean, you all know how this works. Give us a bit of extra damage with our melee attacks, resistances to damage, all that good stuff, as well as giving us unarmored defense. We're mainly starting here for the weapon proficiencies, but you know, you could technically start with the obvious Cleric class that we're going to take as well, the Cleric dip. But here are the ability scores, and I'm going to get into some stuff here because there's a lot of kind of variance to this build. You're going to have to kind of choose how you want to build it depending on what you value most. But let's get into it. So, first up, strength is at 16. Now, this may seem a little bit low, because usually if I'm making a strength-based character, I go for a 17 in strength to use Ethel's Boon and the Potion of Everlasting Vigor to bump this up to a 20 without any ability score improvements. However, the way this build kind of works, we need to put Ethel's Boon into something else. So while I'm still going to recommend you get the Potion of Everlasting Vigor or use Elixirs of Giant Strength for this build, depending on how you want to do it, we're still going to have maximum strength by the end of the day, so starting at 16 is fine, but we do need to use that Ethel's Boon for something else. Dexterity is at 8. Now, obviously this means we're going to be using the Gloves of Dexterity to button this up, as this build is pretty multi-ability score dependent. However, there is going to be a variant of this build which actually swaps our Dexterity and Constitution scores. It's entirely dependent on what you want to focus on. So I'll get into that when we get to the equipment section where that's going to become more relevant, but for now, a 14 in Constitution is going to be just fine for us, as our armor is going to bump this up to a 16 anyway, which is pretty respectable. Intelligence is at 8. I feel like a Shaman who is a kind of religious leader would actually be quite intelligent. I know intelligence isn't usually associated with orcs, which is wrong in my opinion, but, you know, we'll go with a 10 here, since I don't want to just put everything into charisma. And finally, wisdom at 17, which we are going to be using Ethel's Boon to bump this up to an 18. This was just the best way to kind of work out these stats, and I feel like since Gruumsh is a very evil deity, I feel like his highest kind of chosen followers would absolutely do things like, you know, upset Astarion and side with a hag, so I don't think it's very out of the realm of possibility for an orc to do this sort of thing to get these stats, but again, I'll be able to show some different options, maybe if you're not so inclined to do those things. We also have skill proficiencies here. Barbarian has a fairly limited selection, but hey-ho. Being an orc gives us intimidation already, which is nice, which is something we would definitely want. I've gone with the acolyte background because that felt like they made sense for kind of a religious shaman, so we've got religion and insight. And finally, I've got athletics and perception for our barbarian skills. Now, I'm going to be going over for a quick level of cleric. As usual, I usually recommend a level 2 dip into cleric, just for the dialogue, so I'm going to be showing off that one level dip here. But I think if you were actually if you didn't care about that so much, then just starting off with the barbarian levels would be absolutely fine. But let's take that one level dip into cleric now, and it is actually going to get us some pretty nice stuff. First up, our cantrips. I'm just going to be taking the dialogue cantrips for now, that being resistance, guidance, and thaumaturgy. Thaumaturgy giving us advantage on those intimidation checks is really, really nice. As for our domain, it's pretty obvious I said it already, but going for Tempest domain. Tempest domain is actually going to give us access to all martial weapons and heavy armor anyway, so I guess technically, yeah, that's what I meant when I said you can start with this if you like. It's entirely up to you, but obviously we won't be using heavy armor on this build because it will impede our rage. But with Tempest domain, we're going to get a couple of things, namely Thunderwave and Fog Cloud as domain spells added to our spell list for free, which is nice. Thunderwave especially being a nice way to kind of push enemies back and deal a bit of thunder damage, as well as one of the greatest features of Tempest domain, getting it right at level 1, is Wrath of the Storm. As a reaction, strike back against an attacking creature, dealing 2 to 16 lightning damage or 2 to 6 thunder damage. The target takes half damage on a successful saving throw. And I don't know which saving throw this is necessarily, it doesn't actually say, but hey, someone could tell me in the comments. As for our deity, obviously we're taking Gruumsh, the one-eyed, the one eye, okay, I thought it was one-eyed, but the one eye is the Orc's patron deity, a god of war, conquest, and victory at all costs. He has held an ancient and immutable grudge against the Elfin Pantheon since Corellian Larithian took his eye. So there's a lot of hate for elves here, and trust me, I've worked that into the build, which is a weird thing to say, but yes, I have worked racism into this build. Isn't this what you come to this channel for? Anyways, as for our spells at level 1, we are going to get a few. Sanctuary being one of the best spells in this game, in my opinion. Absolutely going to pick that up. Allows us to get set up rounds basically for free. We're playing a Tempest Cleric, so create or destroy water is basically mandatory, allowing us to make our enemies wet, meaning they're vulnerable to our lightning attacks. Command also makes sense. If we're kind of a battle leader, religious leader, whatever, then being able to command troops and enemies makes perfect sense. And finally, you can kind of choose whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. Healing spells can obviously be useful, so having a bonus action heal will probably work out quite nicely for us. Now we're going to go back over to Barbarian. This is going to give us Danger Sense, giving us advantage on dex saves against traps, spells, and surfaces, which is really nice actually. It helps us get around things like Fireball a bit easier, as well as Reckless Attack, allowing us to basically always have advantage, with the downside that enemies have advantage to hit us. Pretty standard Barbarian stuff. Now, this is where I was a little bit unsure of what to pick initially. Me and the community went back and forth between things like Wild Heart and Berserker. We even considered Wild Magic for a while, but we went with Berserker because in the end, and this is one of those decisions you're really going to question, this build doesn't get extra attack. We do not go to level 5 of Barbarian in this build. We want stuff from Cleric more. And now before you click off the video, trust me when I say that we make up for it in massive, massive ways. Namely, the fact that we can use our bonus action for an extra attack while raging, that being Frenzied Strike, meaning that we can make a melee attack with our equipped weapon. However, the downside of that being we get Frenzied Strain. Using Frenzied Strike adds a penalty to attack rolls every time, stacking so that you miss more often. This adds up until the end of your frenzy. So the idea is with this build is that you're actually going to be going in and out of rage pretty interchangeably. So if you feel like you get to the point where your melee combat is starting to falter because of Frenzied Strike, you're going to swap out of that to go into a bit more of a spellcastery variant. And you'll see what I mean when I say spellcastery. But for now, getting that Frenzied Rage to also allow us to be a bit more powerful with improvised weapon attacks and such like that is going to be nice, but mainly we want that bonus action extra attack to make us feel like we have our extra attack when really we don't. But trust me, again, we're making up for that damage in a lot of ways, and again, the utility and control options that are going to come from what I'm going to show off in a minute will more than make up for it. So please don't leave. Next up, at Barbarian level 4, we get to choose our first Feats. Now, it's entirely up to you what you want to go with first. Again, assuming that you have the Potion of Everlasting Vigor, or at least are going to get it soon, then you'll probably already have your Strength at around 18, which is more than good enough for that point in the game. I know, total level 5, maybe a bit early to be assuming that, but I like to think most people enter Act 2 around 5 or 6-ish, so makes sense to me at least. So with that, I'm actually going to recommend we bump up our Wisdom, as it is going to be our main stat for this build, and remember, with Ethel's Boon, this will be at a total of 20 now, which is great. Speaking of using Wisdom, we're going back over to Cleric, and we are going to stay there. This is going to give us a ton of stuff. We get our Channel Divinity at this level, as well as Turn Undead. But also we're going to be able to get Destructive Wrath, allowing us to, whenever we roll Thunder or Lightning damage, we can spend our Channel Divinity to deal the maximum amount of possible damage. Everyone knows the Storm Sorcerer Tempest Cleric combo that makes this feature absolutely busted, and while we're probably not going to be utilising this specific feature to its absolute highest potential, we will still be able to get some pretty decent use out of it. As for our prepared spells, we do get an extra one at this level, and it's messed up my previous spell selection because I multi-classed out of it, so I'm just going to quickly fix that. And I'll pick up Cure Wounds as well because I feel like it makes sense, and Inflict Wounds works nicely too. Next up, at level 3, we're going to gain access to level 2 spells, including Domain spells, that being Shatter and Gust of Wind. Gust of Wind is okay, but Shatter is a really solid ranged thunder damage spell, which you're going to be wanting to be using quite a lot. As well as being able to add some extra prepared spells to our spell lists, there's a couple I would quite like to grab. The most important one, though, being Aid, giving us more maximum HP. Again, we're a frontline fighter tanky person as much as we are a spellcaster, so getting that extra HP is really great. Next up, at Cleric level 4, we're going to be able to pick up another cantrip, and I'll grab Produce Flame because it's blue, and that's kind of a thing we have going here. As well as being able to pick up another spell, I want Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon is going to allow us to summon a spectral weapon that will attack for us, separate from our own attack or sort of turn initiative. And you can summon a spear with this. So I like to think summoning a spear, since spears are so closely related to Gruumsh and the Shaman that we're building, as we'll get to later, it made sense to kind of maybe summon like a spectral visage of Gruumsh's spear to attack with you. So I really wanted to pick this up as kind of a thematic option for the build. As well as being able to pick up another feat at this point, and I definitely think that you have that 18 strength by this point, so I'm going to be picking up Polearm Master. Polearm Master is going to do a ton for this build, more than I even realised when I initially took it. When attacking with a glaive, halberd, a quarterstaff, or spear, you can use your bonus attack to attack with the butt of your weapon. This will deal a 1d4 of damage plus your damage modifier. Which, when we'll have 20 strength by the end of this build, will be pretty high. So now you have a choice. You can go for Frenzied Strike to use your full weapons damage but take that penalty, or you can now use Polearm Master's bonus attack to get a similar sort of thing, but without getting that penalty, just for a little bit less damage. So it's kind of a risk-reward system with this build, but you're still going to be getting that full martial feel, as especially when you're raging, your bonus action is not really going to be used for much else anyway. And spellcasting with this build, unless you're healing, which you're probably not going to be focusing on with this build, again, you're not really using that bonus action that much, so you're pretty much always going to have access to melee damage with your bonus action, which is really nice. Oh yeah, also getting those reaction-based opportunity attacks is surprisingly effective with this build. Again, you'll see why later. At Cleric level 5, we're going to be getting Destroy Undead, allowing us to, whenever we turn them, they take a bit of radiant damage. Nice. We're also going to get access to level 3 spells, including from our domain, Cool Lightning, which is going to be our big lightning damage spell, dealing 3d10 lightning damage, takes up a concentration, but we can continuously use it as long as we maintain that concentration without spending a spell slot on subsequent turns. So, a solid ranged attack for us. As well as Sleet Storm, which is a spell that I will admit I've slept on, but since I've been chatting with Discord community members and seeing their various chats, join the Discord by the way, Sleet Storm has definitely gone up a couple of pegs in my mind. Being able to disrupt concentration really easily, slip people over, making ice surfaces is actually really valuable, especially in a lot of the late game encounters, so it's getting a bit more of a, it's getting a bump up in my eyes at least. But let's have a look at these level 3 spells, including one I'm going to grab first, which is Glyph of Warding, allowing us to create magical traps that in our case can be thunder or lightning, so we're probably going to be wanting to use those to trigger our features and such. At Cleric level 6, we're going to get access to a second Channel Divinity charge, as well as Thunderbolt Strike. Whenever we deal lightning or thunder damage to a creature that is larger or smaller, you can push it up to 3. meters. This becomes extremely strong if you know how to use it right. Basically, the way I ended up doing it in the combat footage that you would have seen and we'll see again at the end is that I created an electrified surface using Create or Destroy Water, then every time my enemy wanted to go back into it, wanted to leave it, I was able to go around them and push them back in, causing them to be repeatedly electrocuted, thrown around, and really controlled the battlefield that way. Again, you'll see in the combat footage just how wild and wacky this build gets. We do also get another spell at this level, and I'm absolutely going to be picking up probably Spirit Guardians would be the most powerful option. I like having Mass Healing Word as well, just in case. Hold Person would be another really good spell to have that I feel like would fit for this build. Really, it's a pick your preference type of thing. Next up at Cleric level 7, we are going to get access to level 4 spells, including 2 added to our spell list automatically. Ice Storm being a massive ice damage attack, which deals bludgeoning and cold damage, and again, if our targets are wet, they will gain vulnerability to cold damage, taking double damage, and if we use Create or Destroy Water, it's going to become an ice surface, which is really nice for battlefield control, as well as freedom of movement, meaning that we cannot be magically paralyzed or restrained, cannot be stunned, and difficult terrain doesn't matter to us. So, I mean, that's nice to have, as a once per long rest buff that just lasts. Pretty good. So yeah, and then we can pick up level 4 spells as well. Death Ward would be a really good one to kind of keep you alive, especially when you're a front-facing tank. Banishment to get rid of allies for a little bit so you can do some setup, or get rid of enemies for a little bit so you can do some setup. And Guardian of Faith just for more passive damage. Again, it's definitely a pick your favourite situation. And finally, at Cleric level 8, we're going to be grabbing Divine Strike Thunder. This is what's going to help us make up for that lack of extra attack. This means that we can, whenever we do weapon damage with our melee attack, we can add an additional 1d8 Thunder, which is going to trigger a whole bunch of abilities on our build. Now, I was under the impression that this is once per turn, and I think that is its intended use. However, with this build and the way we have it set up, I was able to trigger Divine Strike Thunder up to 3 times per turn on separate attacks. It seems like it triggers once per attack type, so I could get it once with our main hand attack, once with our Frenzied Strike attack, and then once with our Polearm Master reaction attack. So again, you're going to see how it gets a bit weird with how often this ability is triggered, but remember, whenever we're dealing that thunder damage, we're triggering our other abilities to push people away and such like that, as well as some equipment that I'll be getting into later. We do also get another spell at this level, so pick one there, and we also do get another ability score improvement, which I'm going to use to bump up our strength to an 18. I'm using a shield with this build, so if you which I personally recommend, but if you feel like you don't want a shield with this build, then you could drop it and use the spear that I have in 2 hands, picking up Great Weapon Master to gain an additional 10 damage and another way to get bonus action attacks. It's entirely up to you, but I'm going to be getting that bump to our strength personally. But again, Great Weapon Master would work great for this build because we have reckless attacks, so it's a pick your poison type of situation. I'll be showing off the shield variant though. And with that is the build. What you're going to be getting out of this is a really unique and interesting playstyle. Despite the fact that we lack the full martial capability of having extra attack, we make up for it in a ton of different ways. The extra damage from things like Spirit Guardians or Cool Lightning or any of our other spellcasting, mixed with things like our bonus action attacks from, either Barbarian or our Polearm Master Feats, being able to use Divine Strike with those attacks, adding that extra d8 on top of our usual damage. There's a ton of different ways to kind of mitigate and control the battlefield. Again, we're going to be getting vulnerability on our lightning attacks and such like that if we go down that route. There's tons of different ways to kind of utilize this kit that you have to kind of manipulate the battlefield, deal tons of damage, all that sort of thing. Now, you kind of have to treat this build as having 2 modes. You have Spellcaster mode, where you're hanging back from the main kind of fray, casting big damage spells like Cool Lightning, disruption spells like Sleet Storm, setting up traps like Glyph of Warding, Shatter, stuff like that. Then you're going to, or maybe even kind of going around with Spirit Guardians if you're doing that. Maybe you're using Sanctuary to get a bit of healing and some setup done. And then you have full Martial mode, where you're a bit more tanky, you go into your rage, and you use the Cleric features like Divine Strike and the other sort of reaction-based things to go full Martial Fighter and be a front-facing tank. So you actually get to do both with this build, and the way this build kind of plays, you really would think that the spellcasting aspect and the Barbarian aspect are really going to step on each other's toes. But honestly, that's not the case. So, it's much to my surprise, being able to alternate between these two kind of game modes feels very, very fluid and smooth. You're not going to be constantly feeling weaker in one aspect or the other. You're going to be able to utilize both to a really strong capacity. I mean, don't get me wrong, if we were going to higher than level 12 in this build, then yes, I would absolutely pick up extra attack, but I don't feel like it's necessary, and I feel like it brings a really different kind of way to play a Barbarian, as well as a Cleric in a strange way. But regardless of that, let's get into the equipment, where this build really starts to come into its own even more. So let's get into the weapons first, as I believe this is probably the most lore kind of important thing, and that is the Infernal Spear. Now, the big thing about Gruumsh's Shamans is that he gives his most loyal and devoted chosen Shamans a magical iron spear. Now, normally these spears are +4 weapons when they're held by an orc, not thrown, believe it or not. If they're thrown, they lose their magical abilities, which is why I didn't go for something like Eldritch Knight with this build. That was an interesting distinction that was made. And as such, I wanted to pick up an iron spear that made sense, and someone in my chat pointed out the Infernal Spear. Now, these magical spears have a couple of properties. Number one, basically they are +4, like I said, but they also specifically deal extra damage against elves, specifically kind of like burning them. So when someone brought up the Infernal Spear and its innate +3 poison damage and the ability to poison the target, that kind of felt like a way of getting that kind of magical iron spear that does kind of gives that extra little bit of burning damage, although in our case it's poison. Now normally this is a +1 weapon, but I've buffed it with the Drakethroat Glaive, using either the thunder or lightning elements. Lightning would obviously but either or would synergize with our features quite well, but lightning would obviously get that kind of vulnerability bonus from making enemies wet, but the Drakethroat Glaive is going to be really, really important for this build, so I absolutely recommend picking it up. And so with the Infernal Spear, you're going to gain a +2 to your kind of attack and damage. Unfortunately, I think this is an Act 3 weapon, but an early game alternative would be the Drakethroat Glaive, so huzzah! So yeah, with the Infernal Spear, you're going to be getting a little bit of extra thunder damage or lightning damage thanks to the Drakethroat Glaive, that extra poison damage, and because we're using this with a shield, we're going to gain 1d6 + 6 piercing. I don't have the Potion of Everlasting Vigor on this build because unfortunately I just can't really get it. The mods that will let you get the potion other than how you would normally get it don't really work for me for some reason. So picture this as having 20 strength, making this build even more powerful. So, but overall, the Infernal Spear is absolutely going to do its job, as you will see. We're pairing this with the Absolute's Protector, which is going to, if we are branded by the Absolute's brand, which I would recommend you do, all damage received from spells is reduced by 1, so even more tankiness. We gain Shield Bash as normal, as well as the ability to use Fire Shield Chill, allowing us to basically make it so that ice cold flames shed light in a 3-meter radius. We only take half the damage from all fire damage and deal 2 to 16 cold damage to anyone who hits us with a melee attack. This doesn't take our concentration, so this remains while we're in rage, so we can get that little bit of like extra kind of flavor of magical rage, which feels pretty fun to use. And again, that buff to our AC is very, very nice. Where I'm also throwing the Darkfire Shortbow on this build. I'm not really going to be focusing on using haste with this build, but you absolutely can, which would help beef up this build's martial capability. But remember, you can't keep that up during rage, so kind of pros and cons there. But this is mainly here to grant us fire and cold resistance, because that just kind of made sense to have on a build like this. So yeah, that's kind of what I was going for there, and it also does give you a ranged option should you need it. Next up, we have as for our headpiece, the Hat of Storm Science Power. Whenever we deal thunder damage, which again we could do quite a lot, we gain Arcane Acuity, meaning that we have a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls and spell difficulty class for each remaining turn. And we reduce that duration by 2 each time we take damage. So, just for doing thunder damage, which we're going to be constantly doing, our spells gain a bit more oomph. Next up is the Thunderskin Cloak. When a creature with Reverberation deals damage to the wearer, the creature needs to make a Constitution saving throw or become dazed. So, for those of you that don't know, Reverberation is one of the most powerful status conditions in this game. The affected entity has a -1 penalty to Strength, Dex, and Con saves per remaining turn. And when the entity has 5 or more turns of reverberation, it takes d4 of thunder damage and possibly falls prone. Basically, if you stack enough reverberation gear, basically gear that will inflict reverberation on an opponent, they will constantly be getting knocked prone and taking that extra thunder damage and being knocked around the battlefield. It's pretty strong, especially with the way it can synergize with other gear. But with the Thunderskin Cloak, especially since reverberation also makes the enemy take a penalty to con saves, so succeeding this con save here becomes a bit harder, they're also going to become dazed, giving them a disadvantage on wisdom saves, they cannot take reactions, and they lose a dexterity bonus from their armor class. So it's just going to debilitate and immobilize your enemies even more. For our chest piece, I've gone for the Enraging Heart Garb. While raging, we're going to gain 2 turns of Wrath, which means we're going to do a little bit more damage for our first couple of turns of rage, as well as giving us a +2 to our Constitution, rounding it out to a nice 16. This is definitely going to be what I would consider the main kind of armor piece you want to get for this build, as it's going to be seriously useful. And now, I'm going to go over the boots first, because the gloves are a different story. We have the Boots of Stormy Clamour. Basically, this is just going to add to our reverberation stacks whenever we inflict a condition upon a hostile creature. They also inflict 2 turns of reverberation. Now, this works with any condition, but since reverberation itself is a condition, we can just basically get double the effect. We can get 2 for the price of 1. We inflict reverberation with our other methods of doing so, and then automatically gain 2 more. But what are our other methods of doing so? Well, this is where this build has a lot of kind of variance in how you build it. I'm going to get into that now. With the spell casting mode, our main option is the Spine Shudder Amulet, meaning that whenever we make a ranged spell attack, we inflict 2 reverberation on the target. Now, with the Boots of Stormy Clamour, that's going to be a 4, and if you remember how reverberation works, that means in 2 of these attacks, we will inflict that maximum penalty, which is pretty strong. But, of course, we do have to use the Gloves of Dexterity with this build, bumping up our Dexterity to an 18. Which means we can't use the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, which means whenever the wearer deals thunder, lightning, or radiant damage, they inflict 2 turns of reverberation. So, but I understand that the Gloves of Belligerent Skies are one of the most powerful ways to get reverberation, and it's overall a pretty strong glove set, which is why I recommend you use this set of equipment until Act 3, in which you can get your hands on this, the Amulet of Greater Health. This sets the wearer's Constitution to 23, and the enchantment will have no effect if their Constitution score is higher without it. Yeah, probably not likely. It would also give you advantage on Constitution saving throw checks, meaning our concentration spells are going to be even more potent. You can pick this up in Act 3 right away without any fighting if you know what to do, so I would recommend when you reach Act 3, swap out the Spine Shudder Amulet for this, and then put in the Gloves of Belligerent Skies instead of the Gloves of Dexterity. This because the Spine Shudder Amulet inflicts reverberation on any ranged spell attack, which is nice, but the Gloves of Belligerent Skies inflicted it on any thunder, lightning, or radiant damage, be it from weapons or spells, and because we pretty much only deal those 3 damage types, we're always going to be getting it, rendering the Spine Shudder Amulet obsolete, so the Amulet of Greater Health makes sense to swap in. So in that case, you would dump your Constitution, equip this amulet, and then put those points that you dumped from Con into Dex instead, making you much more powerful. I think this will probably be the best way to do it, in my opinion, but obviously until you get into Act 3, you're stuck with the Gloves of Dexterity, but then when you get into, Act 3, swap to this combo. And finally, we'll get into the rings, namely the Sparks Wall. The wearer cannot be electrocuted, and we gain resistance to lightning damage. The problem is, with creating water surfaces that are electrified, is that we ourselves can also be electrocuted by it, but with this ring, we are immune to that. And getting resistance to lightning damage just made sense for a build like this. I mean, come on. As well as the Ring of Spiteful Thunder, giving us a similar effect to the Thunderskin Cloak, basically meaning that whenever we deal thunder damage to a reverberating enemy, it becomes dazed unless it succeeds a con save. So we have 2 opportunities to inflict dazed here, when we deal thunder damage, or when we take damage from a reverberating enemy. So, going to be getting that dazed effect off quite a lot, which is going to give you even more battlefield control. All of this gear is vanilla, as well as the face and all the other stuff. This could be recreated completely with vanilla, whereas I would normally use mods for some of the appearances, and for dye I've used for the armor all of it. is the black and azure dye, which I think looks quite nice. Is there anything else I wanted to discuss? No, that is the build. And overall, I am extremely proud of how this one came out. Again, I was really worried about not having that extra attack. But as you can see from the combat footage, this build is... it's strong. It really does a lot. You gain a ton of damage from all of the different things we can do. You gain a ton of utility, being able to keep yourself healed up, use Sanctuary, all that good stuff. And then you go into Rage and just absolutely beat your enemies down, throwing them around the battlefield, electrocuting them. You can do all sorts with this build, and honestly, I'm really impressed with how it turned out. Again, it was one of those builds where I thought, yeah, there's no way this will be good, and then it was. It was surprisingly good. Now, in this combat footage, I don't actually win. Another Steel Watcher came in, and unfortunately, by the end of the combat footage, I did die. But it was such a good showcase of what this build is capable of. The fact that we were able to take out a Steel Watcher, deal so much damage. You can clearly see that this build has a lot going for it, and I felt like this combat footage did such a good showcase of what this build is capable of that I decided to keep it anyway, because usually I try to get a fight where I at least win, but today I was just like, I don't care if I lost. This showed off the build perfectly. So I'm really happy to show off this build. Like I say, I think it is really special. I was just shocked at how well everything came together here. Honestly, Divine Strike, absolute saviour. As you can see, it's triggering in all sorts of places, meaning we just get that extra thunder damage so many different times. It's honestly quite impressive. And again, this technically isn't even the full power of the build. If our strength was at 20, we'd be doing even more here. And in this specific fight, I showed off the Gloves of Dexterity variant, rather than the Amulet of Great Constitution variant. So again, this build could be even stronger, so get the Amulet of Constitution and the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, grab the Potion of Everlasting Vigor, and this build gets even stronger, which is kind of insane to me. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't going to be as strong as a Storm Sorcerer, kind of Tempest Cleric, or a, maybe like a full Martial Barbarian Fighter or something like that in terms of raw power, but everything that this build gets kind of combined into one really makes it stand out as just being something that is a fun and unique playstyle that I'm honestly really proud. And I feel like between the weapon selection and how this build kind of encapsulates Gruumsh's kind of whole deal, I think it actually surprisingly captures the lore of the deity really well. I mean, it always helps when a deity straight up has a kind of example of a chosen that I can just pull from. The only thing I will say is about this build is it doesn't look very shaman-like. I feel like when a lot of people think of shamans, they feel like a people with like hooded robes and incense and all this sort of thing. But then, these are also the kind of shamans that get magical iron spears that burn elves. So, when I said earlier that, like, I got elf racism into this build, and then I found a weapon with poison damage, like, and I flavored it that way, like, oh my god. Sometimes you have to wander with me, sometimes, just in general, but mainly when I make builds. The inspiration is certainly questionable. But yeah, that is the build. I don't think there's anything else really to talk about. As far as channel update stuff, something kind of weird has happened. I've unintentionally started a kind of circus theme here. I did the Stage Magician as a request to my buddy Sin, who is a long-time community member, and then I did the Clown build directly after, not really realising what I was doing, somehow. And yeah, I've kind of started a circus thing, so people have said that they would quite like to see other circus builds to kind of complete the team, so let me know if you would want to see that. I mean, I could do a few things. I do have an old dagger throwing build, which could work for that sort of thing, and then there's like maybe like a beast tamer, which I mean, it's just Beastmaster Ranger at the end of the day. Don't know how interesting I could make that. Maybe a one-level dip in a bard or something. I mean, I could probably come up with a few things. Some people in the Discord have already suggested things, so again, head on over to the Discord if you'd like. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of going, like I said in my last video, I'm kind of going back into like build request mode, so feel free to suggest builds. It's easier for me if you go and do it over on the Discord, as YouTube comments can get lost and I will often forget about them. So send them over to the Discord where they're a bit easier for me to read. I know people don't like joining a Discord, to do basic things that should be a bit more accessible, but it really does make it easier for me. And plus, you get to see all the amazing discussions we have, because I'm not the only one who makes builds around here. Everyone in my community over in the Discord channel makes some really interesting stuff that I think I don't really want to steal from my own videos, but I also kind of do. So, so if you want to see even more creative things from the rest of the community, please go and check these guys out over there. There's a whole channel dedicated to it where you can see some really cool and interesting things. But yeah, that is going to do it for me, I think. Hopefully the combat footage would have played a decent chunk by now. But yeah, I think I'm going to sign off here. Thank you all so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you next time. I think that went